I'm a tech guy, and I love D&D. My mind just naturally wants to try to mix them together to see what might make my D&D games a bit more engaging, or at least provide a new way of experiencing things. In this video, I'm going to show you what table tech I've been trying out at my table, and how I put it all together. Let's see if I can get this table to roll its own. Save versus Justin. If you saw my video on how I created a game room on a budget, you probably noticed me kind of breeze over some of the things on my game table. There were lots of screens and buttons, and they weren't really essential to creating a game space, so I didn't spend a lot of time explaining them. But today I wanted to take another look for those who might be interested. I got my first copy of D&D when I was about 9. I think it was a birthday present. I remember because it was the Moldvay basic set in the red box, and right on the front it said for ages 10 and up. So my 9-year-old kid mind translated that to mean, oh, I can't play this yet. So it sat on my shelf until probably a year later. I was visiting my older cousin, and his friends came over to play D&D. They gave me a piece of binder paper, told me I was a thief, and sent me down a hallway armed with a 10-foot pole. It was, of course, amazing. A couple of years later, I got my first computer, a Commodore 64 with a cassette drive, and some of the first games I got for it were D&D clones. And ever since then, both D&D and technology have been a big part of my life. In fact, for the past 25 plus years, my day job used to be working as part of a technology innovation group for a large healthcare company. All that to say, I geek out sometimes. I know you don't need technology to make a fun and immersive D&D game. And really, other than adding music to my games, I didn't start adding much tech to my D&D until about 9 years ago, when I started a campaign on Roll20 with my friends. In fact, most Thursday nights, that's where you're still going to find us. But with a dedicated game space, I realized I could add technology tools to my table and not have to worry about setting them up or tearing them down with each game. The rabbit hole opened up before me, and I dove right in. So that's my D&D supervillain origin story. Let's dig into the technology. The first thing to point out is that I don't have a chair at this table because I don't sit down much when I run games. I'm usually walking around the table, pointing things out, moving figures, or acting out NPCs. So this means that I need to be able to trigger and manipulate the electronic parts of my game quickly from a standing position. It would probably work the same sitting down, but I did want to make sure that everything was angled up and I didn't have to rely on typing too much on a keyboard. My Dungeon Master part of the table is only about 1.5 feet deep, and that includes some player-facing technology, so space is at a premium. I'll give a quick overview of all the hardware I use, and then explain a bit more about what all this stuff actually brings to the game. At the center of everything is, of course, a computer. As I mentioned, space is limited, so I went with this Mac Mini. This is the 2025 M4 model. It's tiny, and compared to a laptop, it's relatively cheap, coming in at about $600. As you'll see, the key here is actually how many monitors or displays it can handle. This Mac Mini can support 3 displays. There's a magic trick I'll show you that actually lets me use 4 displays, which I need. We'll get back to that soon. I'm using a Mac, but I think a lot of what I'll show you translates pretty well to a Windows PC. A lot of the gear I use is designed to work on either one. Of course, with a computer, I use a keyboard and mouse. The Mac Mini speaker's not that great, so I got this cheap USB speaker to support playing music during games. To help me tune the volume of the music on the fly while I'm standing up, I like to use one of these USB volume knobs. I use a portable USB-C monitor as my main display. I wanted this one to be high resolution because it's going to help me keep everything straight during my games. This is where I'll read my notes, control the digital maps, and ready any PDFs I might need. I made sure to get a stand that angles it slightly up so I can see everything while I'm standing. That was monitor number 1. Monitor number 2 is player-facing. It's a cheaper, lower resolution USB-C display, mainly used to show players digital pictures of what their characters might see, or to help me jump scare them with monster illustrations. This one is angled more, of course, for the players sitting around the table. This screen, sitting face up on the table, is our digital map screen. It's actually a 32-inch TV. This one's made to mount in an RV, which is great because it's small enough to still leave space for character sheets and dice on the table. And it's dumb, meaning it's not a smart TV. It doesn't need an internet connection, and it's not constantly trying to update itself. I don't need to navigate a bunch of screens and apps to get it to show what I want. I turn it on, and it's ready to go. I use that one with the Roll20 virtual tabletop website to display a player-facing map. It looks like the TV I purchased is no longer available, at least not through Amazon, but there are others out there that look similar. To give my players even more room, I mounted legs to the bottom of the TV to give it a little extra height. In this case, I took a saw to one of those wooden kitchen display boards. I don't know, maybe they're called a trivet? Whatever it is, it holds up my TV now. The trick was measuring the shape to cut out so that the monitor sits level on these legs, and then sticking them together. To do that, I used these adhesive strips. Oh, and I also added some small extensions for both the power and the HDMI cable to make it easier to unplug this thing and take it off the table because I don't always want to use digital maps. This TV is meant to be a digital map display, and I absolutely still wanted to use physical minis on these maps, but I also didn't want to scratch up my TV. I found out that for almost any TV, you can get a rigid plastic screen protector. They don't stick to the screen like the protector on your phone. Instead, they kind of hang over the edge. For me, this was perfect. Most of them even come with their own adhesive strips to help you keep them in place. But as you can see, from a GM perspective, this map is sideways, and I need to be able to adjust maps on the fly in Roll20, sliding them around or zooming in and out as needed. Doing that while standing up and looking at the monitor from an angle is like doing one of those cruel dexterity tests that mess with your perception. I can't do it. I need my own monitor facing me that mirrors the map display. That's this little screen. But Justin, that's 4 displays. You said your computer only supports 3 displays. It does, but this little device lets you cheat. It's an HDMI splitter. HDMI is the type of connection or cable that some displays use, notably TVs. So you can plug in 2 displays that use HDMI cables into this device, and then the device itself plugs into the computer, and it treats it as one display, sending the same video signal to each. Magic. The last thing I want is for all this hardware to slow down the game. I don't want to have to spend a bunch of time or break up my flow to navigate menus to find the things I need. I want them to be available at the push of a button. And this device, the Stream Deck, this is a Stream Deck XL, lets you do just that. It lets you create programmable buttons that can automate all kinds of stuff through your computer. All of this stuff needs power, of course. I mounted a power strip that came with a long cord to the bottom of the table to keep it up off the floor and away from players' feet. It was light enough that I was able to mount it using, once again, these adhesive strips. They're kind of like the duct tape of the 2020s. I'll provide links to all this stuff in the description below. Okay, all that hardware is fun to play with, if you're me, but what does it bring to a D&D game? Well, I use it to provide 5 main tools. In IT land, we might call those capabilities, but 5 things to make my life easier as a dungeon master or more engaging for my players. Here they are. The basic one is to keep all of my notes straight and visible during the game. For me, this is a mix of my prep notes and my house rules that I keep in an app called Microsoft OneNote, but, pick the note app of your choice. It might also mean having the PDF of a published adventure up and visible. On a Mac, you can have multiple virtual desktops that help organize the way you want to work. I typically have my Notes app up on one desktop and any PDFs I need on another. My custom buttons can help me quickly switch back and forth between these desktops. In this case, that's just a keyboard shortcut that I trigger using one of these buttons. So a shortcut for a shortcut, I guess, but it helps out. That was Notes, but another common tool I use all the time along with my notes are random tables. That's a whole other rabbit hole you can dive into. And I probably have over 6 books with random tables, plus dozens of PDFs. They cover everything from trinkets and treasures to find, hex crawl encounters, dungeon dressing, wild magic effects. I love them, and so do my players. It's exciting for all of us to add random elements to the game and then see where the story goes, but I don't always know when I'm going to want them, so I need a quick way to pull them up on the fly. The Stream Deck is super useful here. I can program a button for each random table and then organize them into categories. If my players decide to go explore an area I didn't prep for, I can pick a terrain type and pull up a random encounter. If that encounter is an NPC, I can roll to flesh them out and then give them a name. To create the button on the Stream Deck, it's as simple as adding a button with the open action and then pointing at the file you want it to open. I give my buttons a short name as a reminder, but you can use images too. I also make good use of the Stream Deck with my Next Tech tool, playing music, but not just throwing on a generic soundtrack in the background. I want to be able to play music to match the mood or actions in the game, and I want to switch between them instantly. So similar to creating buttons to open documents, I have a whole series of buttons to trigger game music. Now I could add a button that points to a music file like an MP3 on my computer and play it, but often I don't want to play just one track. In the Apple Music app, I've created a ton of playlists that mix and match songs from movie and video game soundtracks to fit certain moods or environments. Triggering those with a custom button is slightly more complex. It involves adding a short script or bit of code that tells the Apple Music app to play a specific playlist. Once you get one working, though, you can reuse that script over and over, and it's magical to slam that battle button and call for initiative. Sometimes my players will just ask me to play the battle music because they like it so much. I can't take the credit though, it's just a mix of music from the Witcher 3 video game and Skyrim. Tool number 3, to go along with my game music, I often like to display images to my players that fit the scene. This is inspired by those cool old school D&D modules that have the booklet of keyed illustrations to go along with certain encounters. I actually want all modules to have something like that. You saw my player-facing screen. I use another Microsoft tool along with that screen to help me create that digital image book. I'm sure most of you have heard of PowerPoint, often used at work or school to show bullet points while somebody drones on about something that's not as cool as D&D. Well, in this case, I'm using it for good instead of evil. I have another virtual desktop open with PowerPoint running in presenter mode, which means it shows me a view of my current picture along with all my other pictures on one screen, while it shows just the current picture to my players. I can scroll and jump to the image I want on my side without giving away any spoilers to the players. Usually I'll load this up with images ahead of time while I'm prepping my game, but I can also add images on the fly if I need to. I just hop over to a web browser on another desktop, search up the image, then cut and paste it into a new PowerPoint slide. There's even a plugin for PowerPoint on Stream Deck to add buttons that let you move through slides. My last tool is probably the most complex. You've already seen that I have 3 different screens set up to deal with providing a digital map. Part of that is because I want to preserve the feeling of revealing the map based on what the characters can see. In other words, I don't want to just drop a map on the table with all the rooms and locations visible. I want it to feel like their torchlight is revealing areas as they explore them. I also don't want to have to use a fiddly tool to select the areas that I want to reveal. If you've used Roll20 or a similar online virtual tabletop, then you know what I'm describing is called dynamic lighting, and there's a lot of work that goes into creating maps that can use it. You have to draw this thing called a lighting layer. It's a whole thing. Or you can buy them pre-built, which is the case for most of the modern D&D adventures put out by Wizards of the Coast. I do both, since not everything I want to run is from Wizards. In fact, I've been adding lighting layers to several Shadow Dark adventures, along with the whole dungeon complex in the original Keep on the Borderlands adventure. That one took a while. But the result is kind of magical. We can use digital maps with physical figures and still provide this fog of war experience. The trick is, to pull that off, I actually need to be running Roll20 in 2 different web browsers. I log into one with my GM account so that I can see and manipulate all the elements of the map. This has the extra bonus of giving me shortcuts to all the creature stat blocks that might be in the dungeon. I log into Roll20 on the other browser using a player account. I just call this other dummy player Torch. That player view of Roll20 goes on both my smaller screen here and is mirrored to the player map screen again using that HDMI splitter I showed you earlier. With that up and running, I can bounce back and forth between views, moving the torch token to act as the character light source, and then scrolling the map around as the players explore and we need more space. Drawing maps is fun too. I still do that sometimes. There's something really cool about describing a map as you're physically creating it and highlighting the details as you go. But sometimes the electronic maps can save me a lot of time and help play move faster, especially if somebody's already created a map in the lighting layer for you. That's a lot of tech stuff coming at you all at once. I know not everybody likes technology at their table. In fact, you might be playing D&D to get away from technology for a bit. But I wanted to share what I learned as I built out my game table. Did you find any of this useful? Have you found other ways to provide similar tools to your players? Do you have a piece of table tech that I'm not using? Please let me know in the comments below. I'm always excited to geek out about stuff like this, and if you geek out too, please consider liking and subscribing. And I look forward to continuing the conversation.